Hello, welcome to Truth Sentinel, episode 43. We'll be looking at logical fallacies. Logical fallacies will help you to find the flaws in people's arguments and in the media. So we're going to be going through them with Anthony, going through some common ones, then again with Seth, and then finally we'll speak to Philip Gardner about critical thinking. There will be some repetition in today's episode, but that will help because these take a while to learn. But they really will help you in finding the truth. Anthony.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
Fantastic.
Fantastic, really?
No, not really, but never mind. That was a complete fallacy.
That was a fallacy, which I guess is what we're going to talk about today, right?
We are indeed. This is episode 43. I'm going to be talking about logical fallacies. And I believe you're going to run down a couple of these fallacies for us. Just tell us a bit about it and give us your take on logical fallacies.
I certainly am. But before I do, I just want to mention my favorite news story of the week. Don't know if you saw this. A lawyer in Kenya has put in a bid for Malia Obama, the daughter of the US president. Did you hear about this?
He's bid to buy her?
Yeah, he's a lawyer. He wants to buy her, and he's offering 50 cows, 30 goats, and 70 sheep.
That's a pretty generous offer.
It's not bad, is it? It's a lot more than Islamic State has offered for Michelle Obama, so yeah.
And is Obama going to take him up on this offer?
Oh, I wouldn't think so. Anyway, sorry, that was completely silly. Logical fallacies, yeah. Look, basically to quickly intro the subject, a fallacy is a defect in reasoning. It can be either intentional or unintentional. So, you might simply make a mistake in reasoning, or you might be trying to deceive someone by, using sneaky arguments. And I think in practice, it's quite often, half and half. And the reason they are so common is partly due to a thing called motivated reasoning. This is a phenomenon studied in neuroscience and psychology. It's a cognitive process where you make decisions and you change your attitudes based on emotion. But more specifically, it's a kind of defense mechanism against cognitive dissonance. This psychological concept where it's a kind of mental distress. And it comes from either realizing that we hold beliefs which contradict each other, or from learning something which puts our worldview or our belief system under threat. So when we argue, we try to minimize this cognitive dissonance, especially if we feel threatened. So we seek out arguments that confirm what we already believe. And when we do that, we're sort of pushing our bias out into the world, because it's helping us to fight this kind of existential threat. Now, and that's how we get a lot of logical fallacies in arguments. It's actually it's an interesting phenomenon in this way. For many centuries, we've had, of course, philosophies and philosophers and political traditions and so on. And philosophers have pretty much always said that the human capacity for reasoning helps us get beyond a kind of surface reflexive view of the world and reach for higher truths. So that idea has been around for a long time, but in the last 10 years or so, there's been some research in the cognitive sciences suggesting that might not be true. That actually, when we argue, we're not searching for higher truths and trying to become more enlightened. There's a theory now called the argumentative theory of reasoning, and the basic idea of that is our whole capacity to use reasoning and use logic evolved just because we like to win, and that's all. So if there's any truth to that, then we shouldn't be surprised to find these fallacies, everywhere we look.
It is true. I mean, I have to agree with you there, or agree with the psychologists. It's very rare that you have a conversation and then start to have a discussion and a debate and an argument about something. And then the other person turns around and says, you know what, you're absolutely right. It's pretty rare, especially if someone's already started defending their position. And I've been guilty of that in the past. If I've taken a stance, I've really believed it probably, and I haven't actually backed down. I know some of my friends would say that I was very stubborn in the past, and I am trying to listen more to other people's points of view, and I think it's good just to turn, if you feel like someone's made a good point, let them know, and start to question whether maybe you are, maybe some of your views could be adapted.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's one reason why it is interesting to look into these logical fallacies, because it does make you more aware. And I think this whole being challenged in your view of the world is a threatening thing, and learning to learning acceptance of that, it's a lifelong skill, I think. So yeah, let's talk about different types of fallacies. There are lots and lots of them, but basically you can divide them into formal and informal. So your formal fallacies are sort of fundamental and structural, and they happen when the terms of an argument just don't match up with each other. So if I want to give you an example from a famous sketch in the film Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It's a classic sketch where you see a crowd of people in a medieval village, and they're pushing a woman into the center of the village. They're taking her to the village elder because they think she's a witch and they want to burn her. So the village elder doesn't say yes immediately. He tries to tease out the truth using logic, but the logic is, of course, because it's Monty Python, the logic's a bit twisted. And you end up with a really bizarre argument which goes like this: witches burn, wood also burns, therefore witches are made of wood. Now that's your first fallacy. It's made up of three parts, like a lot of arguments if you reduce them to their essentials. First, you've got two premises, that witches burn and that wood burns, and then you've got a conclusion, namely that witches are made of wood. But we can see that the premises don't add up to the conclusion. There's something structurally wrong with the argument. So that's a formal fallacy. This argument, by the way, it's a really good one for illustrating something about logical fallacies, which is they don't actually have to be false. So if you took this argument, witches burn, wood burns, therefore witches are made of wood, right? And if you replace wood with stone, then you would get witches burn, stone doesn't burn, and therefore witches aren't made of stone. So there's no, this is also a logical fallacy. The premises don't support the conclusion, and yet it's true. So we can find our way to truth, even if we're using fallacious reasoning. Which I think it's a very interesting aspect of that. And I think it's worth bearing in mind with any kind of logical fallacy. If you've committed a logical fallacy, it doesn't mean you're wrong. So it doesn't disqualify you from the argument, but it does mean you haven't proved the point that you wanted to make. You haven't offered enough evidence for that point to be entered into the argument as a sound piece of reasoning.
That's a very good point, and although we're talking about logical fallacies, I think the point is it's important to be aware of them and to start really thinking about them and spotting them. But yeah, if you spot one, doesn't mean to say that the argument is wrong. It's just good to be aware of them, that's all.
Yeah, you need to stop and go, okay, that doesn't follow, let's approach it another way. The argument, the Monty Python argument, goes on. And the village elder asks, what happens when you put wood into water? And the townspeople say, well, it floats. And then he asks them, okay, so what else floats in water? And in the movie, King Arthur just happens to be riding through the village at the time, and he yells out, "A duck floats in water," which sets up the second fallacy. So the second fallacy is this. First premise, ducks float in water. Second premise, wood floats in water. And the conclusion, ducks are made of wood. So from there, they go on to show that if you weigh the same as a duck, you're made of wood. So they put this woman on the scales, poor woman, with a duck on the other side. They cheat a little bit. They get the result they want. She weighs the same, so she must be made of wood. But they still have to get one more step back to proving that she's a witch. Now, to do this, they use a really common fallacy where you take two premises and you derive a conclusion by massively overgeneralizing. So it goes like this. She weighs the same as a duck, okay, so she's made of wood. Witches are made of wood, which we didn't prove before, but never mind. Therefore, she's a witch. This is called affirming the consequent. So it's when two things share the same quality. So in this case, a woman is made of wood and witches are made of wood, right? So these two things share one quality. So you say basically they're the same. And this is something that, it may seem very, very simple and easy to avoid, but you have to remember that these are very simple arguments. If your argument has quite complex premises, then it might not be so easy to unpack. And also you have to remember that if you're motivated to accept the conclusion, if you're using motivated reasoning, then that might prevent you from seeing that the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises. So let's have a look at one more of these, just to get more of a flavor of how they work. I want to go through one claim made a few years back by the creation scientist William Lane Craig. Now, he's one of these guys who likes to get involved in religion versus atheism debates on TV. And just before the great Christopher Hitchens died in 2011, the two of them had a pretty epic debate. And William Lane Craig is actually a very tough opponent because he's a smart guy and he can marshal lots of facts. And he also understands the principles of debating extremely well. But in this, on this occasion, he really fell into this logic trap of affirming the consequent. He was talking about intelligent design, and he wanted to make the point that the designer really has to be the Christian God. It can't be any other God, right? And as proof of this, he used the existence of scientific method. So his argument basically went like this. First, he explained that Eastern and pagan religions tend to see the world as part of God itself. Yeah? Like the whole of nature is infused with the divine being, or it actually is the divine being, which is true with a lot of what you might call animistic belief systems. Yeah? Then he said, this contrasts with Christianity because Christianity doesn't see the world as being part of God. Instead, you've got God standing outside the world and creating it, which again is true. That's essentially what Christianity says. Then he goes the next step. He says, if God is a mystical and ineffable being, and the universe is God, then the universe would be mystical and ineffable as well. But it isn't. And we know that because we can examine it using science. This was his argument. Yeah? So here is what he argued, broken into premises and conclusions. The first part goes, God is mystical and not comprehensible. The world is comprehensible, and therefore the world is not God, right? Now, I already see a bit of a problem here, because if God is mystical and incomprehensible, then he or she or it or they could have some kind of method that we don't understand for creating a comprehensible universe. But then the main logical fallacy comes in this part. He says the universe is comprehensible, unlike God. Second, in Christianity, God and the universe are separate, and therefore Christianity is the only true religion. So this is basically witches, ducks, and wood, but taken to a much more intellectual level. And like I said, he's not a dumb guy. He's a very intelligent guy. But you know, even the best of us can fall into these traps. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a quick point as well that
yeah, sure.
that you can find logical fallacies in things that you might even agree with. Like I have no problem with creationism and the design theory that the Earth may have been designed, but that doesn't mean to say I have to listen to everyone who makes arguments about it and agree with all their arguments. You can spot logical fallacies in things you agree with, and also you can spot logic in things you don't agree with. I was listening to an atheist the other day. I won't mention his name because I know you're a big fan of his, but he made some fantastic, excellent points on a topic which I may not agree with, but I can't disagree with his logic. He was making some excellent points. He finished off with a logical fallacy, but that's the point, is that you don't have to agree. It's not about agreeing or disagreeing with the main theme of what someone is saying. It's just judging whether a point they're making is actually logically correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was hoping we'd get a chance to talk about some of the fallacies on the other side of the religion versus atheism debate, because that particular debate, in its various forms, is really fertile ground for spotting logical fallacies, both on the religious and the irreligious side. It's just because it is, when it happens and when the people who participate are intelligent people, it covers so much territory that you do find these little logic flaws in it if you look closely. But anyway, so those are formal fallacies which have problems with their basic structure. Yeah. There are also informal fallacies, and here you're talking about problems with content rather than with structure. Now, some people would say these aren't quite so fatal to an argument as formal fallacies are, but I'm not sure. I mean, so people would say, you may not be wrong, but you just haven't given us anything strong enough to prove what you want to prove. Yeah. There are lots and lots of these. Let's start with one called the false dilemma, or false dichotomy. That's when you structure your argument in such a way that you only give the other person two choices, when in fact there are other choices they could make as well. And actually, since George W. Bush was president, some people have started calling this the with us or against us fallacy. So you'll remember when he was running around trying to build his mother of all coalitions, he said that every country on earth has to decide whether they're with the US or against it in the war on terror. But of course that's ridiculous. I mean, you could easily be in a situation where you just prefer not to get involved, where you see that what the US government is planning to do and you think it's unwise, like a lot of European countries did when he tried to drag them into Iraq. Or you could be some tiny country in South America or the South Pacific with no terrorism problem and no particular love of either Al-Qaeda or the US, in which case you just don't care, So
it is a common fallacy, this one, I think, and it's I think another popular one is where, like, if you don't support the war, then you hate the military and you disrespect the military and you want them to die. It's just it's crazy. You can be against the war but still support the military and not wish their deaths and actually respect them as people, but just not be for the war.
Yeah, exactly. There are very often choices in between. Yeah. Now, if you boil this down to its simplest form, perhaps the simplest kind is when TV presenters or lawyers try to corner people with a question that they can only answer yes or no. So the person will insist on a yes answer or a no answer. And of course, if you want to find these, a great place to look is Fox News. Yeah.
They do that a lot, yeah. They
do. Last year there was a great example that you had on Sean Hannity's show. There was a guest called Youssef Munayr. He heads an organization called the Palestine Center, and Hannity brought him on basically to as an excuse to have another rant about Hamas and so on. So he asked this guy, Youssef Munayr, is Hamas a terrorist organization, yes or no? Now, Munayr started to explain why he couldn't give a yes or a no answer, and Hannity just cut him off. He asked the same question 10 or 11 times. So it was a terrible interview. But as it happened, the English activist Russell Brand saw this exchange on Fox News. He commented about it, and then the magazine Vice got interested, and they invited Yousef Munayed to give full answers to all the questions that he wasn't allowed to answer on Hannity's show. So what he explained was basically, he thinks that some of the tactics Hamas use are terror tactics, and he condemns them. But to reduce Hamas completely to being a terrorist organization is reductive, because they're a very large organization. They have different wings. You know, they provide social services, they participate in the legitimate political process and so on. And also there are elements within the organization that use terror tactics. So that's what he wanted to say, but he was being pushed. You know, Hannity was just trying to push him into this false dilemma. You either have to say yes or you have to say no. And again,
Hannity does that a lot, by the way. I mean, Hannity's show is perfect. If you want to practice any of the logical fallacies on today's show, watch Hannity.
Also, if you want to feel depressed about the world, watch Hannity. But listen, going back to religion versus atheism, I mentioned before, these debates are a great place to find logical fallacies, and I want to talk about one that the atheist side are quite prone to. It's called the straw man. Yeah. Now, the straw man is where you vastly exaggerate your opponent's argument, and then you attack the exaggerated argument that they never actually made. Yeah. And it seems to me Richard Dawkins is especially fond of this one. So he'll take the worst quote he can possibly find in the Bible. You know, it's usually something about some arcane law that Christians are supposed to observe, you know, or something particularly weird they're all supposed to believe. And he'll say, how can you believe that, you know? And then a Christian will come back and say, well, I don't believe that, you know, I just don't take scripture all that literally. But Dawkins will just continue attacking, you know, he just refuses to believe it. He wants everybody who believes in God to also accept that, you know, you should own slaves, or you shouldn't allow women to sit at a dining table while they're menstruating, or whatever crazy thing it is. So he attacks people for having much more extreme views than what they actually have, which is the straw man. Yeah? Another one is called the no true Scotsman fallacy, which is probably my favorite, just for the name. So in this case, let's say you've got a guy called Angus, obviously Scottish, and he says, you know, Scots don't drink tea with sugar, you know. And then his friend Lachlan will say, but I always drink tea with sugar. And so then, to try and shoot down Lachlan's argument, Angus will say, aye, but that just tells us you're not a true Scotsman. So if you don't do something in particular, then you're excluded from the category that this person is talking about. Yeah, and it allows people to get away with generalizations. You know, if anybody contradicts the generalization, you can say, "Oh, that's not a real example." And again, this is a Dawkins thing. He loves doing this. He'll say, you know, Christians are against same-sex marriage. Then a Christian will say, "Wait a second, I believe in God and I have no issues at all with same-sex marriage." So Dawkins will say, well, you're not much of a Christian, are you? So he'll take the no true Scotsman defense on that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's run down a few more really quickly, because I know we've got a lot to get through in the show. Staying with the same-sex marriage debate, again, it's a really fertile source of logical fallacies, which is why I mentioned it. There's another fallacy called the slippery slope. Yeah. This is basically where you say one thing will lead to a far worse thing, but you don't make the case. You don't show the link between the thing that is going to happen and the much, much worse thing which you say will happen as a result. Yeah. So in Australia, there's a senator called Cory Bernardi. He's known for being a dick, basically. And he periodically says some quite hilarious things about what will happen if Australia allows gay people to get married. So the first thing he likes to say is, same-sex marriage will lead to polygamous marriage. And then he goes on to say that it might lead to legalizing bestiality. And I'm not kidding, by the way. I'll quote him on this. He says, "There are even some creepy people out there who say that it's okay to have consensual sexual relations between humans and animals. Will that be a future step?" So that's his gay marriage slippery slope, right? And he didn't ask this in a tabloid newspaper. He asked it to the Australian Senate. Now, obviously, it doesn't logically follow. I mean, you could easily imagine a world in which gay marriage was legalized, but polygamous and bestial marriages weren't legalized as a result. Yeah. So if you want to avoid the slippery slope, you have to come up with some evidence. For example, if you could show that there was a fairly influential, say, pro-bestiality lobby in Australia, and they represented a significant number of voters, then your argument would have some weight. Yeah? And if you could show that the lobby was pushing to make legislators recognize an equivalence between like two men getting married or two women getting married, and say a man marrying a pig, then you could make your argument. Yeah? But with the slippery slope, you don't have that evidence, and this guy Corey Bernardi, he doesn't have any evidence about that. So he is definitely on the slippery slope. But you know, every time he says that, he gets free coffee at Gloria Jean's. So you know, he wins either way.
Another common example of that is people saying if someone smokes marijuana, or if you legalize marijuana, it's going to lead to everyone taking cocaine.
Yeah,
that's another common example, which again, I think it's a fallacy, and actually in practice I think there's plenty of people that smoke marijuana who would never consider shooting up with heroin or taking cocaine. So
yeah, if you're going to make that argument, you have to show the progression with evidence, and the slippery slope is when you don't. Yeah. You didn't get my Gloria Jean's joke.
No, sorry.
Okay. Oh, Gloria Jean's coffee is owned by some fairly shady people. In Australia, for example, they've been linked to some very dark goings on. They've got connections to like nasty kind of extreme far right Christian groups. There's one in Australia called Mercy Ministries. They're a little evangelical sect that was outed in 2008. They had applied for benefits from the Australian federal government, and they said they'd use the money to provide psychiatric care to a few of their female members who were mentally ill, in inverted commas. So the government gave them the money, but the ministry denied their members the psychiatric care they'd applied for, and instead they spent literally years convincing these women that they were possessed by Satan. Then they locked them up and they performed exorcisms on them. So the women came out of that completely scarred and fucked up, and they really did have to go into psychiatric care. So that's
Can I just say, would you say this is a logical fallacy then? If you drink coffee at Gloria Jean's, you support the abuse of women.
I think that's a bit of a slippery slope there, Scott.
No, I say that because there's so many companies these days, and everyone's saying you shouldn't go to that company, you shouldn't buy these products, and I just think it's if you applied that to, if you really did apply that to your life, then you couldn't do anything. So I tend to ignore it to a certain extent.
I know what you mean. I think a lot of people would make the argument that by making responsible choices in supermarket aisles, you can minimize you can minimize a lot of horrible things, whether it be environmental damage or moral outrages or whatever. But you do have to be very conscientious to do that. Yeah, but as I said, I'm just explaining my Gloria Jean's joke, because those guys would be definitely one to avoid if you want to be a conscientious shopper, because as I said, like wherever they are, they're associated with these crazy people who lock people in basements and try to what's the word, wrench the devil out of them. And they're also the people who fund the political campaigns of people like this senator who alleges that gay marriage will lead to marriage between men and pigs. So yeah. Another logical fallacy I think we should mention is the appeal to nature. And I want to give you an example again from Australia and from the same-sex marriage debate. There was a Baptist minister there called Rod Benson who published a 5-point refutation of same-sex marriage a few years ago, and it included some great nuggets of wisdom. Here's one. Marriage, says Minister Benson, is intended as the lifelong union of one man and one woman, and this is the natural basis of the family. Now, remember, informal logical fallacies are just arguments that aren't strong enough to support the conclusion, and that's the problem here. The minister is assuming that natural always equals better, which is a fairly weak premise because there are so many exceptions. There's an academic in Sydney called Dr. Benjamin Thomas Jones, and he analysed this refutation of same-sex marriage. He pointed out all sorts of occasions when things that don't occur in nature are clearly preferable things to do. So for a start, you've got the medical field. You know, people have all kinds of weird stuff shoved into their bodies to keep them alive. I mean, everything from pigs' arteries to pacemakers, which are, you know, effectively little robot clocks. You know, and they're really, I mean, they're as natural as, you know, a Hello Kitty doll having sex with a drum machine. I mean, but they are preferable. Arguably, having a pacemaker is preferable to dying in your late 50s and not watching your grandkids grow up, right?
Hang on a sec. Did you just talk about Hello Kitty having sex with a what? Sorry.
Drum machine.
Okay, never mind. Sorry, carry on.
But aside from that, you know, people who make this appeal to nature often don't consider the animal kingdom. Now, bearing in mind that we are animals, you know, there are countless examples of homosexuality and bisexuality observed in thousands of animal species. So if we are part of that kingdom, then we should be no more and no less subject to the laws of nature than say bed bugs. And Scott, you really should have a look into the habits of male bed bugs, because they're fascinating. There's lots of gay sex in the bedbug kingdom, and it's usually not consensual. So to help them out, basically what they do is male bedbugs, they can put their sperm into the vas deferens of another male, so that male inseminates a female with their sperm, right? And to help them out with this, nature gave them huge, sharp penises that can act like daggers. So when one man bedbug sees another man who they'd like to impregnate, they just come up to him and just stab right in, you know, at any part of the body using their, you know, enormous phallus. So you know, making moral arguments from nature tends to get quite messy because it's fucking brutal if you really look at it, you know. Then there's the argument to antiquity, and you know, here you get things like same-sex marriage shouldn't be allowed because it would destroy the traditional institution of marriage, which has been with us for centuries. That almost never works, especially because if you read the Old Testament, there's lots of sanctioned polygamy, but also because there are plenty of things that we've done forever that are very bad ideas. So if you say this must continue because it has continued for so long, that's a bad idea. You know, the divine right of kings lasted for centuries, and the vestiges of it are still apparent in countries like the UK, where you've got this royal family that has no particular qualifications to have any role in the government of the country, but it's just always been done that way.
Don't get me started on the royal family, Anthony, please. But I just wanted to quickly say I agree with you about the there's a lot of Christians who would say, and I'm not anti-Christian, but there's a lot of Christians who would seriously frown on polygamy, having a couple of wives. But you're right, it is actually in the Bible. So I think it should be, a lot of Christians who have a problem with that should at least acknowledge that it's there in the Bible, and it's
Sure,
not.
yeah.
It's not. If they're going to believe the Bible, then they have to accept that at some point that was okay.
Yeah, but then we can swing the other way with that as well and go into Richard Dawkins territory, into straw man territory, and say, well, if you don't believe in polygamy, then you're not much of a Christian, are you? Or is that straw man, or is that no true Scotsman? I think it's a combination of the two. Anyway,
yeah, some of the logical fallacies can be mixed together.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of overlap, I think. Then we've got the bandwagon fallacy, which I think is quite familiar. Yeah, it's really common in the mainstream media, and I think this one relates to some things that we've discussed recently on the show. For example, it's very often used nowadays as a way of labeling people conspiracy theorists if they subscribe to a version of events that isn't the approved version. Yeah. So the bandwagon is basically, doesn't it make sense to believe what most people believe? And if you present an alternative belief, they say, whoa, no. Most people say this, and so if you don't go along with it, there's some problem with you. Yeah. So there you go. There are plenty of others. We won't have time to cover today. If any of the listeners are interested in this, you can find a very good list of these on our website called yourlogicalfallacyis.com. You can download it. You can buy it as a poster. I bought one for school. It's very nice to have on the wall. Before we go, I just want to share one more, because again, I think it relates quite well to previous episodes of Truth Sentinel. It's called the appeal to authority. Now, this one is pretty much what it sounds like, and it's quite a difficult one to avoid, because at some point, when you're discussing serious issues, you have to acknowledge that you're not an expert on everything, right? So you have to look at what a knowledgeable person says and decide if you feel comfortable accepting it. Yeah? And we've talked about this quite a lot on the show. We had two special episodes or chats about the power of experts, yeah? And whether or not we should trust what experts tell us, or whether we should be suspicious of people who claim to be experts. We also recently, on the Truth Sentinel Facebook page, we had a fairly extensive debate about climate change, during which I got rather angry at Alex Jones, which, I do from time to time. But there were three people involved in the debate, and in making our various points, we all quoted authorities, and we talked about, research and studies and so on. We all, in some form or another, appealed to authority. And I mean, none of us are climate researchers, so none of us have been to Antarctica and, dived under the water and measured any ice caps ourselves. So it's tricky to grapple with these issues without using some authority to help us try to understand what's really going on. Yeah. But basically, I think if you make a point, and then you use a quote from an authority to help you drive that point home, then you may be guilty of the fallacy. It just depends. If you're doing it instead of having a real argument, then you are committing a fallacy. But if you've essentially made your point, then you're probably okay. I do think, though, it's often very dodgy, and it's especially dodgy when politicians use it. Again, if we can go back to the illegal invasion of Iraq, we had the world's three warrior nations, by which I mean, of course, the USA, the UK, and Australia. We had those nations all trying to get any scrap of information they could from the International Atomic Energy Agency that would lend some authority to their claims about Saddam Hussein and WMDs. And they would just take the smallest possible thing out of context and go, look, the International Atomic Energy Agency says this, and therefore Saddam must be guilty because this is coming from a higher authority. So when we see our so-called leaders appealing to authority like this, especially when they're trying to get us on board with some kind of agenda they're pushing, I think we need to be very careful to recognize that to recognize that it is a fallacy, and the fact that it comes from a so-called authority doesn't make it right and doesn't make it something we should get behind. And so, Scott, that is all I have for you today. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yes, on your last point, well, Obama supports climate change science. What do you have to say about that, Anthony?
I think that the topic of climate change is ripening as a topic for debate on Truth Sentinel, because I think the people involved in the show and the people listening to the show have quite a wide diversity of views on it. So I think we should discuss that in its own right. What do you think?
I think we definitely have to discuss that, and yeah, for sure. And but I wanted to thank you for running down through logical fallacies and for giving us a bit of a background. I think you've done an excellent job, and as usual, and thank you once again.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. I'm already looking forward to hearing the whole episode, hearing what Seth has to say and other guests.
Okay, great. So thank you for joining us, and speak to you again soon, Anthony.
Okay, see you.
Goodbye. So nice to talk to Anthony there. We're going to go straight over to Seth in a moment, and then to Phil Gardner to talk about critical thinking. Just first, I wanted to thank you for listening to our show. Apologies for some of the sound quality. We're working on that, and we're going to make shorter episodes every 2 or 3 weeks, and focus on improving the sound and the content. So stick with us, and I hope you've enjoyed some of our episodes. Coming episodes will be on Vietnam, survivalists, disinfo agents, world events. So stay tuned. Okay, thank you. Seth.
Hey, Scott, how you doing there?
Very good, thanks. Welcome back to Truth Sentinel. This may be our second or first episode, but it doesn't really matter. Welcome back anyway. It's nice to talk to you again.
Oh, it was nice to talk to you again. It's a pleasure to join you with Truth Sentinel, and I'm glad to see the second season coming to fruition.
Absolutely. It's going to be good to get back into it and to have some interesting guests on, and carry on with what we were doing before, and maybe even take it to another level.
Well said.
So today we're going to talk about logical thinking, critical thinking, logical fallacies, and the tools we can use to find the truth. So anything connected with truth, critical thinking, and logical thinking. So you've been looking into this yourself, and I just wondered what kind of things you think are important regarding these topics.
Oh, wow. That's a good way to put it. I'd say that it's really important for individuals out there, especially critical thinking individuals that are searching for truth, to begin to identify logical fallacies, not just within the information of others and the arguments of others of what's presented to you throughout the media, throughout well, television, which is media, music, media, anything like that, religious texts, whatever you want to say, and also being able to pinpoint logical fallacies within yourself and within your own arguments, your own ideologies, and to be able to minimize those as much as possible, and to logically, to reasonably, and to truthfully engage in open debate.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the logical fallacies in particular are really useful to learn, I think. So we're going to go through some of those. I mean, because they will take a bit of time to learn them, and sort of I think the best way to learn them is to sort of read about them and then try to make your own examples in your head, because it'll kind of help yourself wrap your ideas around what each fallacy is. But can you run through a couple? I've got some, we can talk about, but we can sort of bounce off each other. And
okay.
What kind of logical fallacies? I mean, we've got the basic ones like straw man and appeal to emotion and things like that. Can you go through a couple maybe?
Definitely. I'd say a good place if people would like to find their own little gathering of 24 different logical fallacies. There you can go to yourlogicalfallacyis.com. It's a great site that compiles all of it together and gives you examples there for somebody that might be wondering what is a black or white logical fallacy, what is the Texas sharpshooter logical fallacy, or the appeal to nature logical fallacy. Those, I'd say that helps a lot to be able to look at, and then examining that and then looking in the media and being able to pick apart examples of that is absolutely wonderful. But starting out here, we've got something that's 5 logical fallacies from the gun debate out of emmagill.com, starting with number 1, ad hominem. Here's an example. During President Obama's second inauguration yesterday, Fox News anchor Shepard Smith engaged in a conversation about how popular support for gun control legislation is on the rise. In response to the suggestion that we should enact more gun control, does a self argument ad populum. Quote, we stuck with the polls. We'd asked for a lot longer than we did, end quote. This is an ad hominem attack on the American people, in addition to being a slight appeal to racism. An ad hominem argument is one in which the maker of an argument is attacked rather than the argument itself. In this case, Smith is saying that the American people are wrong to believe in more gun control because they supported slavery longer than it was legally sanctioned. An appeal to racism is a very specific type of ad hominem in which the arguer is accused of being racist in order to discredit any argument he is making. In this case, Shepard Smith, by invoking slavery, is implying that popular American opinion is inherently racist. Therefore, anyone who agrees with the current popular opinion on gun control must also be racist.
Yeah, and Fox News is for anyone who wants to practice spotting logical fallacies. You really just sit down and watch Fox News for an hour, because it's just fun to spot them, because they just come.
Oh yeah,
they come every few seconds.
MSN
you know what I mean?
is really close, or MSNBC is really close, right behind there, and they're actually some news here just to mix it up. There is sinking MSNBC prepares to move right politically on the spectrum. There is because people have gotten really tired of the partisanship, and ironically enough, many of these groups are thinking that they can shift their political agenda there to whatever, to the left or to the right, to be able to salvage their audiences and salvage their ratings, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching Fox News here in Phuket on the satellite TV here, and
I'm sure that's pretty
I've just
funny.
been quite shocked at Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly. I mean, those guys are hilarious. They really are. I mean, Sean Hannity. Oh my goodness, he's a logical fallacy smorgasbord.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and their style of questioning guests is just ridiculous.
Arguably,
I mean,
one of the worst out there, other than maybe CNN's Piers Morgan when he had his show there. Is right there as well for in terms of just.
Oh yeah, yeah. Piers Morgan is. They've all got certain phrases they use to try to. Piers Morgan uses this phrase quite a lot. He'll often say to a guest, "Are you seriously trying to tell me that?"
Yep.
And then he'll say whatever, and he uses that all
Which
the time.
is a term to
try
discredit
sort
you.
of,
From the Gideon, yeah.
It's an ad hominem sort of phrase, really, because it's like, you know, whatever you think, you're kind of stupid.
Yeah, well, how incredulous it is that you could even dare to think to say something like that to me, the high and illustrious mighty Piers Morgan.
He did that to Jesse Ventura, actually, and Jesse Ventura, you know, Jesse Ventura was pointing out about the Building 7 that fell down whilst the BBC news anchor was talking about the fact that it had fallen down, and you know, in the background you could see it was still there, and Jesse Ventura was telling Piers Morgan this, and Piers Morgan said, "Are you seriously trying to tell me that a reputable you know, agency like the BBC would seriously do that?"
Which itself
and,
is
then,
just a reputable agency like
just,
the BBC.
and it's bullshit.
Yeah,
you
the
know,
ones
BBC
that
is terrible.
pedophiles, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and you know, it was all, you know, Jesse Ventura was telling the truth, you know, and people have put that on YouTube to show that Piers Morgan was just talking nonsense, you know.
Exactly.
But Fox News, Bill O'Reilly and Hannity, they often start their statements. So, do you agree with me that?
Yep.
They often do that all the time, and they do that with guests, and it's a kind of like it's a subconscious thing to say, you better agree with me, otherwise you know what's going to happen, which is going to be you're going to get talked over, cut off, or just you're going to get abuse, basically, because that's Bill O'Reilly is terrible for that. I mean, I saw him the other day, and he was talking to this woman, and she disagreed with him, and he's got an anger management problem, I think. And in fact, if you go on YouTube and type in Bill O'Reilly loses it. You can see a fine example of that where he goes absolutely insane and gets really angry over something really stupid. He's got an anger management problem, and he laid into this woman who disagreed with him and then just basically cut her off so she couldn't speak.
I think people do that because of the weakness of their own arguments in many cases. Of, as you just brought up, he uses the black or white thing of having just two alternatives of, do you agree with me, or, you know what I mean, or you don't, is it though there's only two ways to go out of either you agree with me or you don't. There is no, maybe I partially agree with you and think that part of what you're saying is correct and part of what you're saying or implying is incorrect. No. There is only my way or the highway. And of course the begging the question, which is its own form of circular reasoning.
Yeah. But anyway, let's carry on with the logical fallacies. I mean,
let's see. The politician's syllogism is a good one here. Continuing on at number 2, while unveiling his list of executive actions designed to tackle the perceived gun control problem or gun violence problem in America, President Obama said, quote, "While there is no law or set of laws that can prevent every senseless act of violence completely, no piece of legislation that will prevent every tragedy, every act of evil, if there is even one thing we can do to reduce this violence, if there is even one life that can be saved, then we've got an obligation to try." The politician's syllogism is one of my favorite logical fallacies. It's a form of the fallacy in which the undistributed middle, which is best stated thusly: A, something must be done. B, this is something. C, this must be done. This is the bread and butter of political discourse throughout the world, and the president uses it here to justify his executive actions. He freely admits that he doesn't know whether or not the actions he is taking will cure the problem he is addressing, but he says that something must be done. So his executive actions are thus required. This is how many advocates for gun control like to frame the debate, because if something must be done, then they're the good guys for proposing something, even if its benefit is dubious.
Yeah, I mean, the something must be done idea relates to a lot of things, you know, even starting wars,
Yeah.
We've been attacked, 9/11.
Yes, something
we
must
need to
be
go
done.
and attack.
Yeah, exactly. Even though those
something
are
must be
individuals
done.
that
Let's
have
go
done
and
that.
attack Iraq and Afghanistan. You know,
which even if there were
we don't need to
individuals
think-
from those countries or whatever that had engaged in that, I mean, there were no Iraqis that were part of the attacks on 9/11 there, and specifically all these guys, as individuals, we're supposed to believe that they represent a government, or that they represent a nation of people that you're going to invade there or whatever. As you just said, it's perfect because your benefit for any of this, of the wars and all this, is completely dubious and is non-existent. And yet people will be bandwagoned onto it of the idea that, well, something's got to be done. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Don't you love those people?
Yeah, and then of course you've got the appeal to emotion with when the military become involved. It's like, you know, they our boys are going to protect us.
Yep,
you know,
there's the us and
you
them
don't support
mentality.
them,
Yep.
yeah, if you don't support the war, you know, don't you care about our nation? And,
Yeah, those are
don't you care about our boys who are fighting
the
for us?
our boys and our and us and everything is the bandwagon logical fallacy, which is appealing to the popularity or the fact that many people do something, an attempted form of validation, and also the no true Scotsman logical fallacy, which is making what could be called an appeal to purity as a way to dismiss relevant criticisms or flaws of an argument by saying that no real American or no patriot would dare question U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah. I'll try and give another example of just to simplify things even more for the no true Scotsman. It's kind of like if someone says, he can't be a Christian because he does such and such, or
yeah, because he gets drunk
you're not a real Christian.
Yeah.
You're not a real Christian because blah blah blah. Or Christians. I don't know, Christians shouldn't smoke, for example,
Yep.
and then someone says, I'm a Christian, I smoke. It's like, well, you're not a real Christian.
Exactly.
That's a kind of example of that kind of fallacy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is definitely a logical fallacy there, because you're just trying to begin to, well, it's a whole another thing there of trying to use a personal incredulity to attack someone there, an ad hominem attack of saying that, well, as I've used this logical fallacy against you of the no true Scotsman thing, that then thus in my mind I've already deprived you of of a rock to stand on there, of a solid ground to stand on to have an argument with, and thus now you have no place to make an argument from, or to have a reasonable discussion or viewpoint from.
Yeah. Good. How many what other fallacies have you
We
come
got
across then?
3 others here to go over, and just little examples with each. Number 3 is appeal to motive, or appeal to emotion, both of which are really common. In the same speech, President Obama made the argument that, quote, there will be pundits and politicians and special interest lobbyists publicly warning of a tyrannical, all-out assault on liberty, not because that's true, but because they want to gin up fear or higher ratings or revenue for themselves. And behind the scenes, they'll do everything they can to block any common sense reform and make sure nothing changes whatsoever. In response to this very statement, New York Post columnist Michael Goodwin wrote, quote, gun control isn't really President Obama's aim. It's just an excuse to get back into campaign mode and get out of Washington. The appeal to motive or appeal to emotion is a way of short-circuiting an argument by claiming that it is only being made for personal gain on behalf of the arguer. Both President Obama and Michael Goodwin commit his fallacy. Obama does it by implicitly accusing anybody opposed to his agenda of being driven by profit motive rather than truth, and Goodwin does it by claiming that the president isn't interested in doing anything about gun violence, but is rather just promoting himself and shirking his other duties as president. This is fairly typical of both sides of the debate. Some on the left accuse gun owners of being driven by paranoia or by the manipulations of duplicitous and all-powerful lobbyists, while some on the right accuse gun control advocates of being driven by a nefarious desire to eliminate guns and control the American public.
Well, I guess the appeal to emotion, Sandy Hook was an example of that as well. It's like, there's children involved here now.
Yep.
Children have died. We need to get rid of all the guns because do you really want to see more children die?
And that's part of the syllogism of something must be done. If it can only save one life, then it's worth it.
Or as David Icke often says, problem, reaction, solution.
That's the Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah, I was looking into some of these philosophers, actually, Hegel and Plato, and Socrates.
Rather, in some cases, rather evil when you really get down to it, very immoral, but at the same time extremely intelligent.
Yeah, Aristotle.
Well, going all the way up to the more modern day of Niccolo Machiavelli. It's a great example of somebody, a hyper-intelligent person, but a lot of the stuff that has become the bread and butter of many of these pseudo-intellectuals of the modern day is complete immorality and moral relativity.
Well, yeah, not all these, not every intelligent critical thinker is necessarily a good person.
Yeah.
I mean, Bertrand Russell,
very intelligent, arguably the most wicked man in the world, according to what people called him.
Yeah, he's a major eugenicist as well. So that's the thing, that you can actually use some of these logical. I've seen examples of people who are aware of these logical fallacies, but actually use them to justify something else. So you can actually use them. You can actually use these logical fallacies in a kind of as a tool for evil as well. You know?
Well said. Well said.
One, I don't know if you did you mention straw man?
No, I hadn't
up
mentioned
a different
that.
version.
Definitely bring that.
Yeah, I mean that's probably one of the most common ones, really. I know Alex Jones likes this one quite a lot. He talks about this one quite a lot, making up a different version of someone's argument to make it easier to attack, and a lot of people do that. And Fox News again does that a lot.
Oh yeah, well, and people that attack Fox News by the same token, though, of the CNNs or the MSNBCs or the ABCs or more specifically down to like the Raw stories and stuff like that.
Just a quick advert break. Our email is scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Check out our past episodes. We've got lots of interesting guests, and you can find us on YouTube on 2 channels. We talk about conspiracies, mysteries, injustices, corruption, religion, war, peace. You can leave your own message and we can base our show around what you think. That's what we intend to do. You can find our website on Google. Just type in Truth Sentinel Scott and WIX and it will come up. You can find latest episodes there. You can help us find the truth hidden deep within mainstream media. Find our YouTube channels. We've got all the episodes on there. Truth Sentinel and Truth Sentinel 1. Subscribe to both so you get notified of everything. Click on the About section. You'll find all the links. Have you got something you'd like to advertise? If it's truth related, honest and ethical, get in contact. You can help us, we can help you. We sell our own t-shirts with the greatest enemy of truth is blind belief in authority on the back. Just $20 plus postage and packing. Let us know your size, just send us an email, we can sort it out. We've also teamed up with truthtshirts.com. and they make political t-shirts. Let people know where you stand, basically. Use the code TRUTH1, you get a 10% discount, and we get a donation. They make all kinds of political t-shirts, and they can customize them for you as well. If you've got any ideas for publicity stunts, get in contact. We need to escalate this channel, make it much bigger. We need your help. Please support us. Thank you. So Seth, welcome back to part 2 of our chat on logical thinking, finding the truth, critical thinking. So let's continue. It doesn't matter if we repeat ourselves, because you know Fox News does it all the time. Repetition can sometimes be useful.
Agreed.
Yeah. So let's recap.
Continuing. We were talking about logical fallacies there and everything. We'd gotten about 3 in on this specific thing, talking about logical fallacies within the gun control debate there on, quote, both sides, if we were to even believe in such things there as polarized issues like this.
Yeah, and just to summarize, we were talking about logical thinking because I think it's a really useful tool, to look at the logical fallacies. It's not so important to know all the names for them, but just to be aware of them and to start sort of spotting those kind of fallacies. You don't have to identify them by their name, but just to spot them in arguments and to realize they're there, and to sort of hone your critical thinking and to avoid being gullible, basically.
Agreed. I'd say one of the most important ones of what we've got here would be, continuing on, is false causality, which is actually really important. I don't know if I like 100% the example they use here, as you could debate that itself, but it actually does end up working. Both sides of the debate like to throw around statistics that evidence for whatever point they're trying to make. Arkansas Representative Tom Cotton gave a good example of this when he said on Sean Hannity's television show, quote, "The city of Chicago, for instance, has some of the most restrictive gun laws in the country. They also have some of the highest murder rates in the country. You commit a false causality, a cum hoc ergo propter hoc error, when you assume that correlation must equal causation," which is a good point. Here, Representative Cotton is making a point of being made by a lot of people on the right, that places with more stringent gun control laws tend to have higher rates of gun violence, implying that gun control laws cause gun violence to go up. This is a fallacy because it ignores the possibility that two things are influenced by a third factor, or that a high rate of gun violence caused tougher gun laws to be enacted, and so on and so forth. Exactly, as there are a bit more nuances to the debate than they would like you to believe.
Yeah, that fallacy where one thing causes another. I'm sure there's another name for that as well, isn't there? Because I came across that when I was looking at fallacies as well. That, the assumption that one thing causes another when it's not necessarily the case. It could be coincidence, or there may be no relation whatsoever. Exactly.
Let's see, continuing on here, we've got 5, another interesting logical fallacy, denying the antecedent. Only a few days before the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting propelled the gun debate to the front page of every newspaper in America, sports commentator Bob Costas made a splash by quoting a column about a recent murder-suicide of Javon Belcher and his girlfriend Cassandra Perkins. The specific quote by columnist Jason Whitlock is, quote, "If Javon Belcher did not possess or own a gun, he and Cassandra Perkins would both be alive today. The only form of fallacy on this list, denying the antecedent, occurs when you infer the inverse from the original statement. In other words, if A equals B, it is fallacious to assume that not A equals not B. A good example would be, if you are an American citizen, you must be a human being. Therefore, if you are not an American citizen, you must not be a human being." Jason Whitlock is committing this fallacy because he is arguing thusly: that Javon Belcher had a gun, he must have used it to kill himself and his girlfriend. Therefore, if he didn't have a gun, he would not have killed himself and his girlfriend. He is ignoring the possibility that Javon Belcher could have used another weapon, or even his bare hands, to commit this terrible act. It is a good example of the flawed hypotheticals being thrown around by both, quote, sides of the gun debate. Whether it's a gun proponent arguing that there should have been armed security guards at Sandy Hook, or it's the gun control advocate arguing that there should have been a limit on the number of rounds available in a gun's magazine. Not all hypothetical arguments are examples of denying the antecedent or its counterpart, confirming the consequent, but almost all of them are logically dubious, just as almost every argument for or against gun control in America is mired in bad logic and poor reasoning. And I'd say that it's more than just that, quote, debate, but quite a few debates, or pseudo-debates, as we'd call them, in the United States and around the world.
Yeah, and some of that ties in with the early truth seekers that I was going to mention, Aristotle, and you know, he came up with these syllogisms where, you know, you have two premises and a conclusion, such as all A's are B's, all B's are C's, therefore all A's are C's, which isn't necessarily always the case. But you know, these people were you know, they were pioneers of sort of critical thinking, so you can forgive them a little for, you know, not quite getting there at the time. But
yeah, of even their own logical fallacies, because we all have them in our own lives there and everything, and we have to call ourselves out for them as well there if we want to grow as human beings and to be able to have more effective arguments there and to be able to more effectively convince people.
Yeah, and just to give you an example of Aristotle's sort of all A's are B's, all B's are C's, all A's are C's, that's sort of, to give a better example, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. It does work. That kind of logic does work in quite a number of situations, but you know, there's a lot of exceptions as well.
Yeah, and it's not completely foolproof. But then again, so few things in life are.
That's right. You know, and I think it was what was his name, Bertrand Russell, who started to point out some of these exceptions, you know, that there's paradoxes and a lot of exceptions to these rules, you know, and that's what, you know, the search for truth has developed over the centuries, basically, with all these philosophers and intelligent thinkers and critical thinkers, and we're just at another level of critical thinking at the moment. You know, it's my belief that we're not, you know, the human race is not quite as intelligent as we think we are, and you know, we've made some progress over the centuries, but you know, maybe it's only small progress. You know, maybe there's so much more that we can learn. I think individually we can all try to at least get ourselves to a level of critical thinking that can help us in our own lives. You know.
Indeed. I mean, to back you up here further, we got something that shows a good logical fallacy there. Let's see that this is post 9/11 of what we think there is that the issue of the population of Muslim terrorists is very small, and the population of Muslims is very large. As a thought experiment, suppose there are 1,000 terrorists in the world, and suppose 90% of that group of terrorists consists of Muslim extremists. The fallacious idea, then, is that means that 90% of Muslims are terrorists, but there are over 1 billion Muslims in the world, and only 900 of them are terrorists. So the probability of a randomly chosen Muslim as a terrorist is incredibly small, an order of 0.0000009%.
No, that's
so indeed, yeah. In actuality, so much of this, of how people will try and believe this stuff and will lock themselves into weird intellectual pigeonholes because they're not willing to step back and see the bigger picture.
No, that's true, and that sort of ties in with what we've talked about in the past about the whole idea of the war on terror. And you know, we pointed out that, you know, if you actually look at the statistics, you know, you're more likely to be killed by a wild hippo or you know, collapsed furniture, or falling out of the wrong side of the bed, or stung by a bee, than actually being killed by a terrorist. Exactly,
and that in itself is another logical fallacy there, that just because people are reporting on it and you're hearing it's taking up let's say whatever 80% or 70% of the news coverage on a specific channel on a specific day there, that doesn't mean that on that specific day there that 80 or 70% or 90% or whatever of the people that died that day were from terrorists or from anything like this.
Yeah, and you know, a bit similar to there's been a lot of coverage of plane crashes and plane disappearances.
Well, as there always are. Anything that's horrid there, that it is a tragedy and it is a big deal there, people want to talk about. However, is that we always need to remember, just because people are talking about it doesn't mean that this is necessarily happening commonly, that this isn't necessarily a routine occurrence.
It's not, and at the same time, I can sort of understand, when you're in a plane, you've lost control. Basically, someone else is in control of your destiny. So I can kind of understand a bit how, how people, they hear these stories, and it might actually dissuade them from flying. But yeah, if you look at you look at things coldly, look at the statistics, then the chances are there's going to be no plane crash if you get on a plane.
Well, as this example has of course been beaten like a dead horse there, but Jaws. I mean, so many people upon seeing Jaws and any of a number of remakes and other whatever pseudo sequels and all this stuff, spin-offs of any of a number of shark films and just creature in the water films, will convince all sorts of people that swimming is completely dangerous and it'll kill everybody there because there's some sort of monster in the water, when in reality so many people should be more concerned with undertows or currents and everything like that than they should be of some shark coming to attack you in the water.
Yeah, no, it's true.
And yet,
even
in
though
many of those cases, the amount of interactions themselves there that you'll die in are minute, tiny.
It's true. It's so true. But we're all victims to it. I'm terrified of sharks after watching those films.
Oh yeah.
If I go in the sea and I see any dark shapes, I just run out. I'm terrified. So we're all victims of this kind of.
Realistically, though, Southeast
fears.
Asia, man, you'd have a lot more to be afraid of a saltwater croc than you would a lot of that type of stuff as far as sharks and anything. Which I know there are quite a few nasty fish. Also eels, sea snakes, all sorts of wonderful, aggressive critters there.
Yeah, I mean. Fear plays a big factor in our lives as well. I mean, insurance companies, they completely run on fear. They try to make people afraid, so then they'll hand over their money to sort of protect them from these terrible things that are going to happen.
Oh, indeed, and that leads to its own sort of logical fallacies there, which are like, if let's say Fred has life insurance, Fred's still alive, so thus life insurance keeps you alive. I mean, is there a greater contradiction in this world, or a greater impossible thing to promise someone than life insurance?
I personally, I don't take out insurance for anything, because I do feel like, anyone out there who's maybe who does spend a lot on insurance, actually calculate how much you've spent on all the various different types of insurance. You've got house insurance, car insurance,
versus
travel
what
insurance.
They've covered for you when you've needed it. Yeah, you could have saved
versus
that money and spent it otherwise.
What's actually happened, what's actually gone wrong. Most of it is to give you peace of mind. It's operating on fear, basically. Whereas
and once people start looking at it critically, as you're bringing up there, those same insurance companies thus have to push the government and prod the government into creating laws that force people to purchase insurance.
Yeah, they do force you. I mean, if you drive a car, most depending on which country, and you're going to have to buy insurance. I sort of get it to a certain extent, but if you look at how much you spend every year on car insurance versus how many times you've had an accident and how much it cost, you're being ripped off, basically.
Oh, just viciously. I mean, the amount of money these insurance companies make off of this every single year versus the amount of money they pay out. There's a reason they're still in business.
Absolutely. I mean, travel insurance as well. People who go on holiday pay travel insurance over the years. Think about how much money you've wasted. I never bother with it at all, because if some luggage has been stolen, it's probably going to cost me what, £100, a couple of $100. That's it, versus spending hundreds and hundreds of pounds or dollars every single time you go on holiday. It's a waste of money.
Well, similarly, people, the logical fallacy of, let's say, Scott gets robbed on his trip there. Scott didn't have traveler's insurance, so thus, anyone that doesn't have traveler's insurance is going to get robbed. I mean, that's the exact same conclusion that Fox News or somebody like that would have you believe.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I think it's worth everyone out there just having a look at all the logical fallacies. We've only mentioned a few of them. We mentioned straw man, false cause. Which other ones did we come across when we were talking earlier?
Let's see here. We come across, I believe, the ad hominem there, and also the questioning of your motives, of appeal to motives.
Appeal to motives,
Fox, yep.
Appeal to emotion. appeal to authority.
Let's see. I think that's about what we've covered there. A middle ground, I think, is an important one to cover. Of you claiming that a compromise or middle point between two extremes must be the truth. And indeed, as it says here, much of the time the truth does indeed lie between two extreme points. But this can bias our thinking. Sometimes a thing is simply untrue, and a compromise of it is also untrue. Halfway between the truth and a lie is still a lie.
That's true, actually, and I think that sort of ties in with some people's view of religion, like say there's 3 gods or 3 different religions to choose from. Some people would say, well, why don't you
take
just
the middle ground between
take the middle ground and believe them all, perhaps?
Yep, that's theosophy, and I think that
actually,
fence-sitter mentality is what is crippling Western society more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it could be that one of them is actually correct. And it's for you to decide which one.
Well, in fact, it's quite likely that one of them is correct, because not everyone can be right all the time. I mean, that literally is not possible.
Yeah, and although it might not be nice that, say, one of them, a lot of the religions don't actually accept each other's religion. In some way.
For good reason, because if you really believe or have faith that this is the one true religion, the one truth there, spiritually speaking, then yeah, it would be blasphemy for you to believe that anything else there is actually valid on that level.
Yeah, I mean that's for another episode. We'll definitely try and have a debate on some of these.
Agreed. I got to give respect to people there that are willing to, even if it's something that I believe is wrong or they're whatever antithetical to my belief system there or whatever. I have more respect for them for being willing to take that step and to be willing to dedicate their lives to something, their work for something, their life for something, and yet. I see so many fence sitters, even within many of these so-called religious communities, be they Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever, Buddhist, Theosophist, even a lot of these agnostics or atheists. These people, none of them really actually even believe in their own so-called belief systems. They're just fence sitters that want to do what's easy so that they can try and get to their easy spiritual pathway or their easy paradise or their easy nothing. Because in the case of the agnostics or atheists, none of it matters, and I just may as well live for whatever I want. So.
Yeah, and then you've got the other end of the spectrum who believe in what they believe and will never ever waver, and it could actually become dangerous because they're prepared to become suicide bombers, for example.
And then again, that's another group of people there that, while I might not agree with what they're doing, I still have to respect the fact that they're willing to give their life for it in an age when everyone is so jaded, so willing to quit on everything, and so not willing to, or so unwilling to actually dedicate themselves to something. It is almost refreshing to see somebody that's willing to give their life for something like that, even though I don't agree with what they're giving their life for.
Yeah, no, I sort of agree with that. Although I think with everything you should always ask questions, and you should ask yourself, am I really? Would the God I believe in, would he really want me to kill these hundreds of people?
Agreed, and that's what I think in many of those cases, when you actually look at it, while people try and use the dehumanization there on any level, actually most of these religious groups there, if you actually look into their texts, do not support really any of this stuff. So quite a bit of it is actually the people try and blame on wars being started on things such as religion or ideologies there. Much of it is fought over resources, greed, immediate gain.
Yeah, and we've been talking about logical thinking, but there are other factors as well which don't really tie in with logical thinking, and those are kind of like things like gut feelings and emotions and spirituality.
Yep, intuition, discernment.
Intuition, yes. and those things have some validity as well, because if you think about it, like if you use those kind of things, you might question whether suicide bombers are doing the right thing, because would you really want to go to a heaven where there's a God who's laughing and happy that you just killed a couple of hundred people,
Oh, indeed. And that's with all of this stuff of people calling themselves out on their own beliefs and everything is important. But I'd also say the sit-back mentality of it's become of this idea of everyone's right all the time, or everyone from their own perspective is right all the time, has become kind of ridiculous, and there are certain things of objective truths out there, or absolute truths out there, that it is or it isn't, where so many people would like to try and waylay you into this idea that everyone can do what thou wilt to what's right in their own eyes, and thus everyone is right to themselves, and yet that's not reality.
It's probably more likely that everyone's wrong. I mean, Socrates, Socrates, who spent, if he existed, this is spent his life finding the truth by asking questions, and he said, "I only know that I know nothing," which has a certain amount of truth. And he was charged for basically spreading these ideas that you should think for yourself. He was actually sentenced to death for that, and other people tried to help him escape.
Weren't they going to make him drink, was it hemlock sap?
That's right, yeah, and he had the chance to escape, but he chose not to, and he drank that hemlock. I must admit, I disagree with him. He said he believed in he believed that it was essential to obey established laws. No, I disagree with that. But you've got to also admire him. If some people say he didn't actually exist because he only exists because in history because of Plato, basically, who basically documented Socrates' entire life, and Plato was supposed to be
but there are a lot of people in history that if we didn't have anecdotal evidence from one or two different sources there, that would not exist. And yet they dispute the existence of people who are documented by 40 or 50 different people, their sources. I mean, look at everybody from Herod to Jesus Christ himself is denied existence by all sorts of people, despite being some of the most historically reputed people throughout human history.
Yeah, no, I was listening to someone who's just disputing that Jesus ever existed. My logical thinking regarding Jesus' existence is, if I wanted to actually become as famous as Jesus, it would take an incredible amount of events to achieve that and work, and it's extremely unlikely I could ever do it. So the idea that someone who'd never existed could do it is just, I think it's, if logically thinking, it's unfeasible.
Yeah, well, that's why there's even so many people within the atheistic scientific community that still bash the whatever you call them, like the zeitgeist crowd type of people that will say that, oh, he never existed, and he's an amalgamation of all sorts of stuff there, of even people that don't believe in the in what he said he was or who he said he was there. They still believe in the literal personage of Christ there, as we're talking an actual guy that actually lived on the earth.
Well, this is the other thing, I think, a very important thing about finding the truth and thinking logically, is don't just listen to one or even two people who have a certain view, because I think some people do that. They'll say, no, I don't believe Jesus did exist because I've read this book, or I've seen a couple of these documentaries. But really, you can make a case for most arguments, and you can make a documentary about it, you can write a book about it, you can present facts about it. But unless you examine all those different views from opposing views as well, you just can't really trust it, and it does make things difficult, because finding the truth is not an easy
fallacies within each of those arguments, because everyone's arguments individually there have their own logical fallacies formed throughout them.
Yeah, no, that's true. And while we're talking about logical fallacy, we should point out that just because an argument has a logical fallacy doesn't mean that argument is false. These logical fallacies just help you to realize that it's not necessarily 100% true, but it doesn't, identifying a logical fallacy doesn't mean that the argument's false. It just helps you to doubt, maybe,
Yeah, and also realize that whoever's making this argument is a human being, just like yourself. Any of these people there, we're all subject to our own preconceptions, our own notions there, and what we're trying to get across to people. I mean, as much as many people in the so-called independent media like to act as though they're independent or nonpartisan or anything, we all have a certain bias individually that, even as much as we might fight it, still comes out through our speech, through our actions, through a lot of our work.
We do all have bias, and I think most of us tend to, we've got our established views, and it's quite difficult to change someone's view. And if you think about it, personally, it's quite difficult for someone to change your views. But I think we should all be open to having our views changed. There's no shame in changing your opinion about something if you've been presented with a lot of facts and from a different point of view, and listen to it, and take some time, but don't be ashamed to change your views.
There's the tu quo qui as well there, which is avoiding engaging with criticism by turning it back on the accuser. For an example here, let's say Nicole identified that Hannah had committed a logical fallacy, but instead of addressing the substance of her claim, Hannah accused Nicole of committing a logical fallacy earlier in the conversation, which itself is its own form of logical fallacy by not actually having to, as you're saying there, address someone's claims or listen to what they're saying or actually just decide whether or not it's true or what validity it has, but instead simply latching on to the logical fallacy and using that to dismiss someone's claims.
Yeah, I read about that. I thought where I read about it was called the fallacy, but yeah, all of these fallacies.
They've got that on here as well. Here,
yeah.
The fallacy of the thing here would be, let's see, an example of recognizing that Amanda had committed a fallacy and arguing that we should eat healthy food because nutritionists said it was popular. Elise said we should therefore eat bacon double cheeseburgers every day, which is its own form of, instead of just using it to dismiss someone's claims, you literally use it to create an antithetical to it. Of if that's a logical fallacy, then it must be the opposite of that is true.
Yeah, and I can testify that's not a good idea to eat bacon double cheeseburgers every day.
Oh,
I tried it once,
Yeah, it's gained like an additional 50 pounds. Didn't work out so hot with, I'm sure, your arteries there and everything. It's just, double bacon cheeseburger, especially if it's a McDonald's double bacon cheeseburger, in which case who the hell knows what you're eating.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had a bad experience with a McDonald's last month, actually, but I won't go into the gory details of that.
Yep, it's just ridiculous sometimes. Ridiculous. But do we have anything else to wrap up here on our...
Well, I wanted to ask you, just to wrap up, I wanted to ask you what you would say is a definition of critical thinking. I mean, I'll start off, but maybe you can add some stuff to it. I would say critical thinking is looking at different points of views. So don't make a decision based on one point of view. Look at different points of views. Analyze. So trying to find out as much information and be critical about it, sort of, dissect it. But do you have anything yet to add to what, anything about critical thinking?
No, I'd say you pretty much had it there of being willing to ask questions when you believe someone's wrong, and also being able to ask questions at times when you're more convinced of your righteousness than anything else there. Being able to question yourself, which I'd say is easily as important, if not more important, than being able to question the information of others there, because your own belief system, for the most part, is based off of a lot of information that you're getting from others. In fact, pretty much exclusively, other than what you observe for yourself there. I mean, through sight, taste, touch, hearing, whatever like that. I mean, that's pretty much what you got.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I would encourage people to look into the different types of logical fallacies. I would liken it to learning karate, basically. If someone attacks you and you've been studying karate, then you're more likely to instinctively,
successfully defend yourself.
Defend yourself by doing some of the things that you've learned, basically doing some of the moves you've learned.
And here you're intellectually defending your
intellectually defend yourself because you've learned some of the logical fallacies, and you'll instinctively, if you study them for a while, you'll instinctively spot them.
Yeah, and then you can turn it there. I'd say to go just on a wrap-up note of what we were talking about earlier there, a nice logical fallacy is a good example of, it's good when somebody in the military of your country that you identify as is willing to give their life for a cause that we'll just, whatever, for the freedom, the government, all that's right and good and true. But when somebody else does it there, then they're a horrible person. I'd say that's a good logical fallacy that's engaged in the media quite a bit.
Yeah, and with Fox News, you can often see the appeal to emotion occurring when it comes to military, because they quite often, if you take issue with some kind of war that's going on, then you don't support your troops. Now that's a logical fallacy. It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with why the war is occurring in the first place. It's not that you don't respect the military going out there. You know, you want them all to come home safely, but you have to reserve the right to disagree with what's going on.
Indeed, indeed. Right on. That was well said, and it's a good way to wrap it up here. It's nice talking to you, nice talking to your audience there, and hopefully we can cover this or any of a number of topics here on True Sentinel again.
Yep, thank you for joining us, Seth, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you and speak to you again soon.
I did it. All right, God bless. Goodbye.
Thanks. Hello, Phil. Welcome back to Truth Sentinel.
Hi there, Scott. Good to be here again.
So today's topic is logical thinking, critical thinking, and finding the truth. What were you focusing on for this topic?
So I guess what I focused on is more critical thinking than logical thinking, because there's quite a big difference between them. And there's actually a National Council for Excellence in Critical Thinking, which I didn't know about before I started researching this. They define critical thinking as actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication.
That's probably why you haven't heard them, Phil, because they've used such long terminology that nobody really understands what they're talking about.
I guess, but if you were reading this, which is, I'm reading this from a notepad that I made earlier because I couldn't remember all of this myself, but it makes sense. It's kind of basically all of the above that I just mentioned is basically being used as a guide to belief and action. So that's how they define it.
Okay.
And I think Wikipedia defines it much simpler terms, like as clear reasoned thinking involving a critique, which kind of makes sense.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. And it's much clearer and easier to understand. So the reason why I'm kind of interested in this is because it has a lot to do with our education. I see it as having a lot to do with our education. And in our current system, I was trying to think earlier of where critical thinking kind of enters in our education at any time during my schooling. And the only time I could really think about it was when we had to write essays as part of homework or whatever. And these essays had to be an argument that were backed up with references to experts on the particular subject you were writing about. And I could only remember the kind of history essays that I was really writing, but I guess it would happen in English literature and a couple of other subjects as well. But when I thought about how critical thinking actually entered those bits of work, it was very minimal, because everything that you wrote was subject to the opinions of a teacher and to the experts that you were referring to.
Yeah, like in sociology essays when you have to refer to like a famous sociologist or something like that.
Right, you'd make some sort of argument. You'd be writing an essay on something to do with criminology, for example, and you make the argument that all criminals have some reasoning behind their criminal behaviour, and you have to find references to any other sociologists and criminologists on that sort of subject who are saying particular things, and any argument you make has to be sort of backed up by those references. So basically everything that you can say has to be subject to the opinions of the experts, I guess, and of the person who's marking your work. So it's very difficult to actually to use critical thinking in these situations, because already you've got some story being told you. You've already got people sort of saying, well, this is the argument for this. These criminals, they do have some sort of reasoning behind their actions, and this is why. So it's very difficult for you to come up with anything particularly original or unique that might still have some that might still be true, but there's no backing, there's no other reference to do this.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I found that very much at university as well. Like it didn't seem like anyone was interested in any new ideas. They're only interested in existing ideas, and that if you're going to have an idea, it had to be backed up with at least 2 citations from sources of people who agreed with you. But you were not respected as an authority on the subject yourself, or to have any opinions yourself, unless you could find someone in history or someone, you know, world-renowned, respected person, academic person, who could agree with you.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So basically, like, the reason why I bring all of that up is because already our critical thinking has been suppressed. You know, from the very beginning of our education, we're not taught to look at the world through our own eyes, and to just observe it and then see what comes up from our observations, see what conclusions kind of come up in our minds after we've observed something for a while. And a perfect example of this was when I was reading, I've read a few books from alternative educators, and there's one very famous guy called John Holt, and he wrote a book called How Children Learn. And in that book, he mentions a visit that he did before writing the book to a guy called A.S. Neal, who was the founder of Summerhill School in England, which is is one of the first sort of real alternative free schools in the UK. And he went to visit Neal, and it was basically just for a chat. And they sat down in this room, and after a few hours of just talking about how children learn and the education system, Neal's brother-in-law came in and asked to watch a rugby match. Now, Neal and Holt, they knew nothing about rugby. They didn't know the rules of the game. They'd never really watched a game before, but they agreed to watch it together. And so Holt watched the first half of the match, and he had loads of questions coming up in his mind, like, why is that guy picking up the ball with his hands, and why is he running that way, and so on and so forth. And his mind was just racing with all these questions because he didn't understand the rules. And he didn't ask Neal about the rugby, because Neal didn't know, obviously, and he didn't ask Neal's brother-in-law because he thought his brother-in-law was too engrossed in the rugby match to be bothered to sort of teach someone about the rules of rugby. So he just sat there. He decided to sit there and just watch like a child would, you know, just watch this whole game, not understanding anything about it, and just observe it like a child would, like a child listening to an adult's conversation. They just kind of listen, but they don't really understand, but they carry on observing it. And the half time came, and they listened to he listened to a commentator making lots of comments on how the game had been played and which players had done well and so on. And then the second half started. And about halfway through the second half, it was then that all of these movements that the players were doing in the rugby match started to fall into place in Holt's mind. He started to understand the offside rule. He started to understand why they're all running with the ball in a line, and why they have to pass backwards, and so on. And this was only through his own observation. He hadn't asked anyone about it. He hadn't read a book on it. It was just through his observation that he picked this up. So this is, for me, it's like a perfect example of critical thinking in a way. It's just allowing your mind to observe and seeing what comes up by itself. And at first, in Holt's mind, loads of questions come up, obviously, and a kind of almost a stress because he has no answers to any of the questions. But you allow those questions to sort of settle down. You allow your mind to settle down, and after a while, the sort of the truth of something, the truth of an observation, starts to come by itself. And this is what I think is kind of behind, is in a way the mechanism behind critical thinking. It's like giving ourselves the opportunity to observe the world around us, to observe life around us, without listening to what has already been said about whatever it is you're observing.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Basically, it's kind of like the self-discovery method, sort of learning visually, or learning using your own deduction, rather than just you know, a lot of people can sit and listen to a lecture, but you don't really learn so much that way. You know, this is a method of learning where it's sort of a hands-on approach, which is lacking in a lot of areas of education, I think. But I wanted to give you a potential danger to this way of learning, although I kind of subscribe to it, you know, personally. But there's one guy that I may be interviewing at some point who totally believes in what you've just talked about, and this way of learning and critical thinking, and he's actually a believer in the flat Earth theory. Have you heard of that at all?
I have. I've heard that it's actually quite scarily popular. There are hundreds of thousands.
There's some people who are believers in the flat Earth theory, and they're basing this on the fact that you should believe in what you can see with your own eyes rather than what people are telling you. So they're sort of saying that, you know, if you look with your eyes, you can see the Earth is flat. So that kind of makes sense, and I kind of do admire that kind of idea, the way of thinking that let's reject everything we've been told and learn everything for ourselves. So basically, they're using the same method, you know, using their eyes, what they observe. But could they be wasting their time a little bit? Because it does seem unlikely that the Earth is flat in this modern age. You know, we've got photographs, we've got pilots that are flying around the globe. They all say this is a conspiracy. Could it be that this form of critical thinking has its own flaws as well?
See, I don't think this is particularly critical thinking. I think this is actually listening to another story. It's not actually using your own critique to listen. Because if you only need to climb to the top of a mountain, and what you actually see is not a flat Earth, you see the curvature of the horizon, right? You don't even need to be that high up.
That's a conspiracy, Phil.
But that's what I'm saying. Like quite often conspiracy theories are being they become popular because someone has already talked about them, and yet the people who adopt them as a theory, they haven't actually observed anything for themselves. They're just taking on a theory that they think, oh, that could be true because that makes sense. That already confirms my original, my already existing belief system. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, true. I guess that is someone who's not using critical thinking or logical thinking. That's someone who's just accepting something without critically analysing it too much. But anyway, continue with what you were talking about. I'll let you carry on a bit.
Yeah, so I guess I started discussing this idea of critical thinking in the education system, and it has a kind of link to the story that we've told ourselves. So for many centuries, human beings have passed down a story of our worldview from parents to children and from teachers to students and so on. And this story is what has molded our society, molded our culture, our belief systems, our religions even. And you only need to look at, for example, if I can use the reference of Stephen Fry, for example, because recently he's been in the news quite a lot, or been on Twitter quite a lot, or whatever. He went viral on the internet because of his denouncing of God as being utterly evil and monstrous. And he was being questioned. I can't remember who the interviewer was. And what did he think of God? What would he say to God if he actually existed? And Stephen Fry came out with this very clear, critical sort of denouncement of God as being quite monstrous because of all the bad things that go on in the world. But everything that Stephen Fry was kind of talking about in terms of God is like, it's like the old version of God. It's like that story of God as this big being with a beard up in heaven, in the kind of behind the pearly gates in the clouds, controlling everything. And this is like another story. This is just another story that has kind of risen from human beings' own kind of fears, our own, not from any critical thinking, but from from one story after another, I guess, you know. And if we look back in history, we see all these different stories. Like at one time, the world was flat, according to everyone, and a lack of critical thinking meant that no one questioned it, even though they could see the curve of the horizon from on top of a mountain. And nowadays, that same lack of critique still feeds our belief systems. In the past, it was all about vengeful gods, hell, lots of demons, lots of terrible consequences for all our wrongdoings. And now we have many fears, many different kinds of fears, still feeding that story of life, still feeding that story of the world that we live in. Now the story consists more of lots of anxieties about the lack of wealth and the lack of security. What am I going to do if I don't have money to pay for this or pay for that? And more importantly, that there is something wrong with each of us as a human being. This is a belief, an overriding belief that is in every single human being I've come across in life, that we need healing, fixing, strengthening, remodeling, redesigning, because there's something wrong with us. We don't trust ourselves. We don't love ourselves. You know, and that's again like a big part of the story that we've been telling ourselves for many decades, for many centuries and millennium even, and it's kind of there. So this lack of critical thinking has led to this overarching story of the way we see the world, the way we see ourselves, and the way we see life, and how life should be lived.
And do you think this is so we're going down the wrong path at the moment because of the education system? Would you say that's the case or not there?
Well, in a way, I think going down the wrong path is again like part of the story. You know, the only thing that is perhaps wrong with what we're doing is part of the education system, in that we're not being we're being taught what to think, and you and I have talked about this before on previous shows. We're taught what to think and not how to think. And really, if we were taught how to think, we'd almost be left alone by teachers to observe things for ourselves, to work things out in our own particular way. But you look at the story, how the story has affected society nowadays, and we think that we've got to follow someone else who's successful. So as a result of the story, there's this belief in the power of fashion, for example, in clothing. There's this belief in celebrities, in fame. You ask the majority of people, young people out there, what they actually want in life, and most of them say, "I want to be famous," and they don't care. They don't think about like what it is that they want to be famous at. They just think they want fame. And this is a result of this lack of critical thinking, because they think that they see all these celebrities on TV, or these musicians and anyone who's become really successful at what they do, and they think, if I follow them, if I do exactly what they do, then I'll get the same success, I'll get the same fame. And yet the opposite is actually true. I looked at, there's this, I don't know if you know the TED Talks, TED Talks on YouTube. Well, there's one I watched recently by a Scottish woman, this woman from Glasgow called Caroline McHugh, and she's worked with many successful people, and she points out that the only thing that successful people have in common is that they have nothing in common. Absolutely nothing in common. They are absolutely authentically themselves. And on her TED Talk, she introduced this singer called Jill Scott, this American singer, poet, and performer. And this singer was asked just before a performance where she was about to go on stage. She was asked by someone if she was nervous following this other act, and it was apparently some big act. And her response was really nice. She said, "We all have our own thing. And that's the magic, that everyone comes with their own sense of strength and their own queendom or kingdom. Mine can never compare to hers, and hers can never compare to mine." So just in that short sentence, she summed up everything about being a human being, about being an authentic human being. Now, we're not here to compare ourselves to others, we're here to be authentically ourselves. And if people had a sort of sense of critical thinking, they would see that in all their celebrities and all their successful people that they try to follow and mimic. They would see that all of them are just being themselves, that the only reason that they're actually successful is because they found what they really came here in this life to do, in this world. You know, they've found their unique gifts to give to the world, and their unique gift is unique.
That's debatable, isn't it? Whether because if you look at someone like, say, Kim Kardashian, she's world famous. She's got all the money she'll ever need, but all she does is show off her body, you know.
But this isn't success this isn't success in terms of having loads of money or being a celebrity for the sake of being a celebrity. This is actually being success. This is what Caroline McHugh was talking about. Not in terms of having loads of money because you've inherited it from your parents, or that you've suddenly become a celebrity because you've been on TV and you have a nice body or whatever. That's not the success she was talking about. She was talking about people who are actually successful at something and who love what they're doing. There's a big difference there.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there's different definitions of success, isn't there? I mean, a lot of people do think of, you know, having lots of money as being success, but personally, yeah, I think success is you achieving what you want to achieve, you know, and that could be personal for each person. You know, if you want to be a musician, you could be a musician who plays in your local community and is well known in your community, and you've already achieved success. It doesn't need to be worldwide, you know. Yeah,
and what you were saying about this, the success in terms of Kim Kardashian, or someone who earns loads of money but isn't actually particularly good at anything. This is kind of part of the problem. This is kind of part of the symptom of a lack of critical thinking, because people think that to be successful they just have to earn a load of money somehow, or to be successful they just have to become famous and have loads of people approving of who they are and liking who they are and following who they are on Facebook and the internet and so on. But that's a lack of critical thinking. That's thinking that someone who is like that, who just has loads of money, is automatically a perfect human being. They're automatically happy, and yet all the research that has been done on this kind of thing, the sociological research, shows that it's actually the opposite. You know, people who do have loads of money, it's not a guarantee of happiness. It's not a guarantee of joy in life. And many people who've had loads of money have actually committed suicide. Many people, you know, having money and having fame makes no difference to a person's joy in life or to a person's psychological balance. Not in the slightest.
How do you think this could be addressed, say, in the education system? Because is it something to do with being young as well, and that people's minds haven't developed? Because if you look at something like, I always look at Twitter and the things that are popular on Twitter. You know, if you tweeted a quote from Gandhi, or if you wrote something down that was really profound and had, you know, meaning for the entire world, you'd probably get a couple of people might retweet it. But if Justin Bieber tweets that he's just going to the shops to buy a packet of crisps, or chips to our American listeners, he'll get 100,000 retweets. How would you teach the younger generation that that's kind of absurd to actually encourage, you know, this amount of interest in something so pathetic? You know, is there any way that could be dealt with, or should be even?
I honestly don't have an answer to that, really. I don't know what would be the best thing to do. And what I would say is that they'll possibly learn themselves. You know, all this that's happening right now, you know, with the example you just gave of Justin Bieber, you know, perhaps that's the lesson in itself, that these youngsters will find out for themselves. They're going through an experience that is unique to them, their generation. You know, I never had a Justin Bieber of my generation. We had I don't know, the kind of pop stars and so on were of a different sort of, it was a different era. You know, I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, and it was a very, you know, we didn't have the internet at that time, and so on. So the youngsters that are going through this particular situation, you know, it sounds ridiculous to us, but I'm sure we were going through loads of situations in the 80s when we were in our teens that sounded ridiculous to our parents, and they kind of thought, wow, God, what can we do about this? You know, are they ever going to learn? And I guess we learned everything that we needed to learn from those particular situations that we went through. Just as I'm hoping that the young generation of nowadays will get over Justin Bieber at some point and realise that what's all the fuss about.
But the disturbing thing is, it does appear to carry on into adulthood for quite a large number of people, you know, and it's through the media as well. It's encouraged through the media, like magazines and newspapers. This sort of, you know, people refer to it as dumbing down, and you know, things like the Sun newspaper, and you know, women's magazines, and television like soap operas and things like that. Why are adults still interested in some of this, what can only be described as complete rubbish? You know, their mind needs to be stimulated by something, and they've opted for like a weekly soap opera, which is kind of stupid when there's so many things going on in the world that could be dealt with if we all sort of got together and helped, and just people seem more interested in looking at and listening to the dumb stuff, you know.
Yeah, and I think this is just a case of people learning at different speeds. You know, we can't kind of, I don't think you can kind of push someone to really adopt a new way of thinking or a new belief or even a new choice, you know, because you said that people have opted for these kind of this dumbing down, but really it's the fact that they don't know of many other choices, and what they've been given on a plate, on a silver platter, if you like, is what the media have kind of served up to them, which is all this, exactly what you described it as, kind of dumb stuff that doesn't make much sense to us. But this is kind of, I think this is just a part of people's own need to learn for themselves, to learn in their own way and in their own time, and it will take as long as it takes. I don't know what else could really be done. You could offer, it's like you said, you could offer some of the wisdom from Gandhi, or you could offer Justin Bieber, and many people will obviously take the Justin Bieber because it's perhaps fun to them, it's exciting, it's like, and Gandhi's just this skinny, boring old guy who's dead now, and has no reference in their own reality. So I think what I see slowly happening in the world is things coming through in much subtler ways, is the kind of the wisdom of Gandhi coming through the more kind of mainstream stuff. And it does take time for the, what would you call it, like the kind of the stuff on the outskirts, the stuff that, for example, take music, like techno music was a real, it wasn't mainstream at all in the early 90s and the mid 90s. It was quite sort of on the verges, and yet 10 years, 15 years later, it became so mainstream. It was like being played in every club that you could find from Ibiza to London, and people were listening to it. So that I think it just takes time for that kind of stuff to filter through into mainstream thinking, and it takes time for people's belief systems to change. So I don't know what you can do to force that change to happen. I just think it's going to happen naturally. I don't think you can really keep people dumbed down for that long, because I don't believe nature actually allows that to really happen for very long. You either kind of, I think nature either suffers through a series of incredible crises, or it moves onwards, it evolves, it learns how to deal with its latest problem. And I think people, you know, people's bodies, people's minds, people's hearts, they're amazing things that can overcome load of them, a load of other amazing things, can overcome many, many different obstacles. And I think this is what we're faced with, a whole wide range of obstacles at the moment that we've never had to face in history before. You know, and this dumbing down is one thing. You know, it's like, I think it's another form of addiction, and this is one of the biggest things that I think we do face is addiction. You know, it's everywhere. I was reading recently about sugar, for example, and there are several new documentaries about sugar and the sugar industry, and I did not realize that sugar is way more addictive than heroin, cocaine, than even tobacco. And it's arguable that it does just as much damage to the body, but over a longer period of time, because it messes up the adrenal glands, it messes up the digestive system, it messes up the cognitive processes, and yet it's kind of there in our mainstream kind of society. It's like in so many different foodstuffs that we buy. And white flour too. White flour from modern day wheat is a killer. It basically has loads of poisons in that poison us really, really slowly. And so this is the real addictions that we have. You know, people wouldn't think of going without sugar or white bread. It's like a staple kind of crop for it's a staple food for us in Western society. But it's there, you know, and it's there as a real addictive thing amongst all the drugs, amongst the tobacco, amongst the alcohol, and amongst all this dumb entertainment, I guess you could call it. You know, all this real, how would you say, like talentless entertainment, like you said, with the Kardashians and the Justin Biebers of this world. You know, that they may be able to sing all right, they may be able to dance all right, but they're not really doing anything particularly unique. They're just sort of following a few moves, and they're singing someone else's words and so on. And I think we've become addicted to some of the most ridiculous things that I guess any human being could ever sort of think of in history. And it's there, like, as this real problem in our society that I think we are slowly overcoming. You know, there are more and more people who are getting past this, who are realizing, like, what the hell am I doing with my life? I'm kind of wasting it listening to this stuff. I'm wasting it, like, listening to the comments on Twitter of this person or that person or whatever, because they make no sense. They don't make any difference to my life anymore.
But don't we really need a change in the way people think, and a change in the way media is run, and ultimately we need a change of government?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that is kind of happening, but it's perhaps not happening in certain people's sort of timescale, I guess. You know, we want it now, but it does take time for these belief systems to change. You know, and you said about our current system of government, or the people in government at the moment. The reason why they, I guess, making a change to the education system isn't of interest to them is because for them it worked. You know, for many people, maybe for a minority of people, I'm not really sure, but for many people in society, in English society I'm talking about, but I think it's perhaps all of Western society, the education system worked for them. You know, it's a competitive system, and the people who get into government, for example, they got a decent education, and they perhaps used the old school sort of network or whatever to get into a position of power and authority, and finally they ended up as an MP. And so for them, the system worked. You know, they're happy where they are. They don't want to lose what they've got. And I think anyone who was born into their position, they'd be doing the same thing. You know, we can't sort of say that we would do something differently if we went through all of the same circumstances as them. So I can't blame the people in government for the way things are at the moment. But I totally agree with you. And I think, you know, very soon we'll be having this sort of change of government happen. I think there'll be people coming into the system coming into the system as for example, constituent MPs or whatever, and there'll be people who went through situations that didn't work for them, who went through an education system that they were really unhappy with, who went through a job system, a career system that just didn't work for them either, where they realized, like, I'm working 8 hours a day, every day of my life, until I'm 60 odd years old, and for what? Just to survive, so that I can survive when I'm an old person, when my life is almost already over. That doesn't make any sense to me. You know, and these kind of questions seem to be being asked more and more by not only my generation, but the generations below me, and even the youngsters, you know, that are coming through school nowadays. You know, many of them are actually saying, I hear them say, like, when an adult asks them what do they want to do when they're older, and they just sort of, their answer is, I want to be happy. You know, and it seems like such an obvious answer. It seems like such a sensible answer, but we couldn't answer it in that way when we were younger. We had to answer it in some way of like I want to be a scientist, or I want to be a doctor, or an engineer, or something like this, something that other people saw as important and serious. You know, and this is the whole thing about being an adult, is like this seriousness, this self-importance and stuff that I think that's not making sense to people anymore. You know, more people want their childhood back, more people want to play more with life. That makes a lot more sense to people, and having fun, you know, in life, that makes a lot more sense to people than being so serious and trying to achieve something all the time and trying to progress and trying to do this and do that or whatever. Like, it's not making so much sense to more and more people. And so I think slowly what is filtering through is people where this system no longer works for them. You know, it hasn't worked for them for a long time, and so we're going to be making changes as we go along. You know, with each person we meet, whenever we have a conversation like you and I are having now, it makes some sort of difference, it makes some impact. A small seed is kind of planted in a kind of a field of beliefs in that person's mind, in that person's sort of psyche, and slowly those seeds kind of grow into full-blown beliefs, like where the belief is no longer about that old story that I was talking about earlier, but a whole new story. Life isn't about kind of working for the majority of it just for security, just so that I can survive, so that I have enough money. Life is much more about really living, you know, really using life as, really using the world as a playground, you know, which is, I think, what it was made for.
Don't you think, though, that society at the moment just kind of rejects thinking for yourself? If you come up with your own views, then you'll often be trampled on by our society. Also, how much of the information we hear from authorities should we believe? How much of history should we believe? You mentioned articles in the media. There's a constant bombardment of contradictory information. You know, sugar's good for you, sugar's bad for you. How do people know what they should believe?
They work it out for themselves. You know, I think I mean, part of critical thinking would not be shutting yourself off from other people's opinions, and from any sort of subjectivity, but actually listening to that and taking it on board, and then applying it with your own experiences, with your own observations. So eat some sugar yourself and feel what happens in your stomach. Feel what the sugar does to you. Feel what it does to your mind. You know, how does your thinking change with that input of all of this quick fire energy? And over a period of time, you know, you will start to notice how things affect your body. You know, if you're not taking that sugar along with loads of white bread, along with loads of cereals, along with fruit and vegetables and various other things, you know, if you're stuffing all of those different foodstuffs inside you all at the same time, you're never going to work out like what is affecting you in what way. So you can't really be thinking critically. And this is the same, it's the same sort of situation with the advice we're given. If you look on the internet for on any particular subject, you type into anything in Google and you get 9 million pages, that's 9 million different web pages that have something on that subject. So it's kind of overwhelming, and it overwhelms your whole system. And you'll get one argument, like you said, you'll get one argument and the opposite argument and another argument that is slightly different, and so on. So it's like overload for the mind. And it's the same thing with foods. You know, if you take loads of different foodstuffs all in the same meal, your body can't work out, and your body has a knowing. Your body has its own kind of its own mind, its own truth. So if you take loads of different foodstuffs all at the same meal, your body can't work out like what is affecting it, you know, in the bad way. What's creating the excess stomach acid, because your body can't handle one of those foodstuffs. But if you take things like in small doses, one at a time, and you observe, you really observe, you almost do a meditation. You take time to feel, to think, to smell, to use all your senses to see how something affects you, or what something really, to really gain an experience of one particular thing. Then your body will know. And whether it's sugar or whether it's the sprouts, for example, people talk a lot about the health of living foods. So sprouted, different sprouted seeds and grains. And they say, like, that's a really healthful thing. But for some people, you know, it doesn't work for them. For some people who eat sprouts, their stomach has a reaction to them. So
we all know what reaction that is.
Say again?
I said we all know what reaction that is.
yeah, often loads of gas or whatever.
Sorry, I lowered the tone there. Sorry about that.
That's all right. So I would just say, like, the most important thing with critical thinking is still being able to listen to other people's opinions and other people's sort of subjectivity, but not to take it on as a truth. You know, take your own truth as the truth, and your own truth needs you need a bit of space, you know, a bit of time for yourself to really have an experience, to really experience what this feels like. You know, for some people, climbing a mountain is the best thing they could do in the world. For other people, it's a nightmare. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to exhaust yourself like climbing up a really steep hill just to come down again? It doesn't make any sense to them. So you've got to sort of work out life's experiences, you know, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, and honor those things, you know, honor like what your body is telling you about those things, honor what you really feel. And the only way you can honor that is by, in a way, sort of not paying so much attention to what other people think. And now I was talking about this story that we've been telling ourselves for a long time, and how it's affected our society, how it's molded our culture. Without the critical thinking, we basically get led along by all these fears. We believed in the story. We believed in all the parts of it which tells us that we need to be better than others, that we need to be in competition with one another for limited resources, for wealth, for approval. We believe that we need the approval of as many other people as possible. And we believe that if our way is slower or less productive or less efficient or less effective, or for that matter in any way less than anyone else's way, then we're doing it wrong. Whatever that is that we're doing it wrong, and we've got to adopt someone else's way. With critical thinking, we would look around us with wide eyes and spend some time observing the world around us. We wouldn't be listening so much to what other people have to say about it, but we'd be taking it in for ourselves and making our own judgments. We'd realize that nature thrives where there's diversity. We'd see that diversity fades away when one species takes over, and that the human race fades when everyone follows or mimics or copies one type of person. We would see that for ourselves. We would experience it for ourselves. So you asked earlier, you know, if we can get to people at an earlier age to really sort of adopt critical thinking and to not get so affected by mainstream media, for example, and by celebrities and fame. And I think this is sort of part of it. You know, if we could sort of adopt something in our education system from a very early age that sort of honors who each person is, just for the way they are, for the way they learn, for the way they do a particular act, we would see that sort of success comes with knowing who we are and with honouring that, and not trying to adopt anyone else's opinions just because they've convinced so many people that they're right. I think we would be celebrating the differing opinions and appearances and characteristics and talents of every other person that we come across, instead of seeing them as something to ridicule or to fear or to beat as part of the competition. And that's, you know, this is a big part of the story that's going on now, and that's, you know, that is still there now, like this competitiveness. We feel like we're in competition with everyone, that we've got to be better than them, rather than that Jill Scott, you know, what that Jill Scott singer sort of said, that phrase of hers, in that mine can never compare to hers and hers can never compare to mine. You know, we should all be thinking that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. What may be true for some may not be true for others. If it's harmless, then it's kind of okay, but if it affects others in a negative way, then it's maybe not so good. Thanks for joining us today anyway, Phil, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd love that. And yeah, you're most welcome. It's always a pleasure to come and talk.
So thanks for listening to today's show. Really appreciate you taking the time. Please give us some feedback. Let us know what you think. And stay tuned for next episode coming soon. Thanks.